Hey guys, and thanks for tuning in. We're on to episode 2 now of Improving Your Game, my series where we're trying to improve your battlefield awareness and your ability by making sure all the basics and the fundamentals are in place for you. Last week we covered the basics and setting up your hardware and your mouse, and this week we're going to jump into the game and we're going to get straight into it, going through the game settings and your mouse sensitivities, things like that. Okay, so here we are inside the options. We're going to start with the controls, although there isn't really that much to change in this particular section, but we'll go over it anyway. Vertical look, well, that is personal preference, mine's on normal, and vertical flight is inverted for me, but I don't really use vehicles whatsoever, so vehicle mouse sensitivity is a bit mute for me. As you probably know, I'm not a big vehicle guy, certainly not a big pilot, so those settings are kind of mute for me, but they might be more important for you, so set those up accordingly. Mouse sensitivity I'm going to come back to because I don't really use this slider at all. I go into the config itself so I can change the sensitivity to exactly the amount I want it, because it isn't easy to change it to the exact amount you want, but I'm going to get onto that in a minute. Joystick sensitivity, again, not really important, and vibration isn't important unless you're using a controller. Raw mouse input, I have this set to on. Essentially what it'll do is if you have it set to on, it will take your mouse settings directly from your mouse itself rather than from Windows or anything else. It kind of makes sure you don't have any mouse acceleration and different things like that on your mouse, so I have that set to on. In terms of gameplay, not really a whole lot here, is there? My config actually got set the other day, reset, and I didn't really bother changing most of the stuff, but there's not really much in here. In terms of weapon zoom, I use hold button. I don't like the fact that I can click it and it stays on. I find I'm much more smoother and it's easier for me to go from aiming down the sight and hip firing if I can hold it, because then I can just let go and carry on firing. And steady scope, again, hold the button. Network smoothing factor should be, if you've got a decent connection, all the way to the left. And the other day, as I said, my config, for some reason it completely reset, it went back to default. And I jumped into a game I hadn't even realised at first, and then I changed my controls when I realised, but I hadn't changed a couple more settings back, and I kept getting shot around corners repeatedly. And then I looked in the options, and lo and behold, my network smoothing factor had reset itself. Now by default it's all the way up here, okay? What essentially this network smoothing factor does is it takes away some of the smoothness of the animations, but means that you have a much better idea of where players are. The server essentially adds on seconds when you're playing, and when you get the animations, it's not necessarily where that player actually is. It's all smoothed out and made nice, etc. What the network smoothing factor does is it cuts out a lot of that, and it gives you an accurate reading of where the enemy is. An upside to that is it means that you have an accurate representation, so you very, very rarely get shot behind cover. It still does happen, but nowhere near to the extent that it did before. What it can do, though, is it can give a bit of jerkiness to animations. The knife animation is quite jerky when it's all the way to the left. But in terms of competitive play, like I am, I will always have it all the way to the left to give the best possible experience. But if you've got a bad connection, just play around with it, see where you like it and see if it makes a difference for you. Minimap type, I've got mine on hybrid, but again, that's personal preference. So audio, volume, not really going to go into volume, that's entirely what you want. I have my speaker system on war tapes, just because I like the sound, and I have enhanced stereo mode on. And voice over language, well, English, I couldn't even change it if I wanted to. Okay, so moving on to the important stuff, video. So here's what I've got, okay. I've got my resolution as 1920 by 1080. My hertz of my monitor is 120 hertz. For some reason it shows as 119.98 because that is the technical value, but it is 120 hertz. So that's what mine is set at. I said this in the previous video, but if you get the chance to get a 120 hertz monitor, I do recommend it. They are really, really good. You will notice the difference, 100%. Full screen, that's obviously on. My brightness, I don't really mess about with that too much in-game because I kind of use my monitor's brightness rather than the in-game, but again, you can change that if you want to. Vertical sync is off. Vertical sync will smooth out the jagged edges on things and things like that, but it will limit your FPS at 60. No good, don't want none of that. Field of view, I want mine at 90. I don't want it at 60 because 60 is just too low. It starts off at 60 and it goes up to 90 and it just gives you much more peripheral vision. It can impact a little bit on your FPS, not a great deal, but if you're having FPS problems, lowering your field of view can actually help a little bit. And colorblind support, I have that on. I just prefer the colors. To be honest, there's no reason. I'm not colorblind, but I prefer the colors when colorblind support is actually on. In terms of actual graphic settings, I have, as you can see here, everything on low. I usually have the mesh quality though on high. For some reason that's on low. So graphics quality, I put it on custom. Texture, shadow and effects, all on low. Mesh quality is on high because that sets the detail level and the draw distance of objects, so that's the one I usually have on high. But terrain quality, terrain decoration, anti-aliasing, they're all on low and off. Anti-aliasing is on low. Motion blur is off. Anisotropic filtering is on 1 because that's the lowest amount you can go down to. And ambient occlusion is off. Now, I can run this game on Ultra. I can run it on Ultra without any issues. I can set everything to the max possible level and I'll still get 80 to 100 FPS. The reason I set it to low is because I'm a keen bean, and when you play 5v5s sort of day in, day out, you don't want to be giving yourself a disadvantage or having any FPS drops. I want the most FPS that I can have. With having a 120Hz monitor, I want 120 FPS constantly. So I'll set all these things to low, even though I can run them higher. It's important to know one fact though. Battlefield does have an issue where if you are running anti-aliasing, it will give you mouse lag. It's a bug, I don't know if it's in the engine or whatever, but if you run anti-aliasing to a high level, your mouse will feel a lot slower and laggier. That is why I'll always play with it off, and I kind of have a habit of playing with it off on all games now. But it's a bug in the engine, so just bear that in mind. Key bindings, I'm not going to go into key bindings because that is personal preference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into game now and I'm going to show you something. This is how I set up my mouse. Okay, I am currently playing a lot of Counter-Strike. I would say Counter-Strike is my main game right now. If you watched my video on Monday, you'll know that I'm about to play in a LAN tournament with Counter-Strike. So that is my main game. I've got my sensitivity in Counter-Strike just how I want it. When I was playing Battlefield, it wasn't so much of an issue because I was playing Battlefield day in, day out. I had the same sensitivity. When you go in between games though, it's a little bit more difficult. So I have my main sensitivity in Counter-Strike set up exactly how I want it, and this is how I did it. I put my mouse right to the end of my mouse mat, and I moved it as far as I could before it went to the edge. And that's how far my mouse goes. If I do a complete swipe of my mouse mat to my mouse is on my monitor, it goes almost 180. Almost. So what I did was, I did that in Counter-Strike, worked out the distance, and then any other game I play, I do the exact same thing, so I can have the exact same sensitivity in every game. Now, my sensitivity has changed over the years because I've had a couple of different gaming surfaces, but I'm actually pretty much back now to what I used to have when I was very first playing Counter-Strike 1.6. Now, the important thing is, if you're going between games, especially Battlefield, Counter-Strike, or even if you're playing another FPS single player, it really can mess up your aim. So I would recommend just taking a little bit of time. You know the distance it's going to take in your main game, so let's say your main game is Battlefield, measure the distance it takes you to do a 180, and then do the exact same thing in other games. And it's really that simple, and you'll get an accurate then sort of sensitivity when you go in between games. What I'm going to show you now though is how to fine tweak that sensitivity. If you go into the options here and you go to mouse sensitivity, it's really awkward to get an accurate sensitivity. Really awkward. But there is another way of going about it. Okay, so you want to set your sensitivity, but you're finding it really awkward using that silly little slider in the game, and you can't quite get it to where you want it to be. I'm going to show you how. What you need to do is you need to open up your Battlefield 3 config file, and that's located in your My Documents folder. Now you can access that via two ways. You can either go to Start, Documents, and there you go. Or you can go Start and open up your personalized folder. Mine's called Andy, and then My Documents in there. When you're in there, you want to go into your Battlefield 3 folder. You want to go into Settings, and then the file you want is this file called Prof Save Profile. You're just going to right click it, click Open. You're then going to click WordPad, and you're going to open it up with WordPad. And then you get this file. Okay, now in here, all it is a text file full of all your settings that you've got in Battlefield. It's just a hard copy. So, for instance, I've got my field of view there, my contrast, my refresh rate, it's all saved in here. There's only one particular command you want though, and you want to find it by pressing Ctrl and F and clicking Sense. That's all you need, and you'll find it here. The file it's found, or the command it's found, is gst input.mouse sensitivity, and mine is set at 0.060000. That is your actual figure for your sensitivity, and that's what you want. You just go in, change it a little bit, tweak it, save the file, close it down, and there you go. You don't need to mess around with the slider anymore. You can have a more specific number that suits your needs. And when Battlefield 4 comes out, you can just use that, either the same file or the same command, just copy and paste it. Now, sensitivities are very individual. What works for me won't work for you. What I recommend is you play, you practice, you pick a sensitivity you're happy with, and you keep it across all your games. Use the technique I gave you about setting. Use the technique I gave you, enabling you to set your sensitivity across all the games, and you will see an improvement overall. Now next week we're going to jump into the game. I'm going to show you tips and tricks, things that you should and shouldn't do, and hopefully that'll be really useful for you. Like and subscribe, and as always guys, I'll catch you on the next one.